All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans of all ages, I am Beast Mikey. You have now arrived in my train of thought. It's time to talk about week number 2. We're already 2 weeks in because, of course, football season is like an accelerated clock. It always goes by fast. Let's talk about week number 2. Green Bay is becoming an NFC contender before our very eyes, and I think we kind of expected it, but for the defense to look this dominant this quick is really saying something. The pass rush is getting home at an alarming rate, and they're still stopping the run at a respectable clip. Jordan Love is doing his thing with the ball, and Dyson cats up with his receivers. He also went angry runs earlier today, which was quite nice, but he's dicing up defenders with his receivers. Josh Jacobs is doing his thing. Tucker Kraft had a dominant game. So did Romeo Doubs and Jalen Reed, but especially Kraft. This was just a generally good, dominant Packer win, and Green Bay, I think we got to start talking about as a team that can absolutely get to the Super Bowl. No question the Packers can get there. And now we get to the AFC East portion of this video. This was relatively easy. The Jets were no match for the Bills, and this worked out, I think, as a lot of people would have expected. Buffalo's high-end talent of Josh Allen and James Cook and a very good, sturdy defense were effectively all that was needed to take care of the Jets. The Jets were incredibly mistake-prone. They weren't really turnover-prone, but just mistake-prone with a lot of penalties and a lot of inefficiency, as you kind of expect from the Jets at this point. And Buffalo did their thing without much of a fight from the Jets. And by the time they switched over, I don't think anybody saw Justin Fields get hurt and probably concussed. So we'll see what happens later on in the week when it comes to Fields and his health. But at least Tyrod Taylor threw a touchdown pass, because he always seems to be around whenever a team needs a backup quarterback. Now to a far better game in South Florida. There were some things that were on the line today. Tua's streak against the New England Patriots in his career. Mike Vrabel's streak against Tua in their career. And, of course, Drake May at Hard Rock Stadium, where it's, for better or worse, kind of okay. This was way more than okay when it came for May. The Patriots only punted twice in this game, and that's a lot of it because of really good third down conversion rate for New England. They did very well there. Even some third and longs, which Anthony Weaver, you got to fix that ASAP. Now, Miami's offense did come alive. It took an extra quarter, but Miami's offense did come alive. And Tua was able to actually have a relatively good 3 quarters, getting the ball to Waddle, to Achane, and to Tyreek Hill especially. The 2 guys drafted by the Dolphins scored. Tyreek did not, but he did have 100-plus yards. Anyway, this came down to the very end, and a chaotic series of events. First, New England's punting the ball back to Miami, and though New England's kicker was bad, he missed 2 extra points, New England's punter was good. He had some boomers, and one of them was a 70-plus yarder. This punt ended up going to Malik Washington, who is proving himself to be a pretty solid returner. Washington would bobble the ball, but he actually recovered it. It ended up going around to the left, to the far side, if you're looking at it from a TV angle, and he went to the crib. The next thing that happened after a Riley Patterson extra point gave Miami a 4-point lead, New England decided, we're not fond of this whole trailing thing, so Antonio Gibson kind of responds in kind and scores a touchdown. So whatever momentum Miami had, they immediately gave back with a punt return. So Tua basically had 2 opportunities to have the go-ahead score and win the game. And both of them effectively ended the same. The first of which was a false start, and he had a penalty, burn timeouts, just inefficiency, and then the 4th and 9 leading to an NO, which could have been avoided had he seen Julian Hill in the flat a little earlier. And then the second one happens, this time down 6 as opposed to 3. Achane steps out of bounds at the 26-yard line, and it never touches the ball again, which is kind of weird because he was the best Dolphin on the field on Sunday. And instead of this happening, you get a shot to Waddle, I should say, and an okay second down to Connor, and then back-to-back sacks, one of which he steps out of bounds because they had nowhere to go, and you can't waste time without timeouts. So it was just a disastrous ending for Tua and Miami, and a game that was absolutely winnable if you made a handful of plays, or in this case, just stopped Antonio Gibson from scoring a touchdown. That could have also been avoided. So New England streaks go on. Vrabel against Tua, and Tua's against New England's effectively ends. And New England goes to 1-1. Is there a nuke coming to Miami? There might be. We'll see. There's not much really to say here between Cleveland and Baltimore, except for that both these defenses are very good. The problem is Baltimore has a real offense. And this is effectively what happened. Derrick Henry didn't have to do but too much, and instead, this was Lamar Jackson dicing people up. Sure, Roquan Smith, my pick for Defensive Player of the Year, scored a scoop and score tutty, but this wasn't really about him per se. This was really more so about how good Baltimore's talent is compared to Cleveland's, and Baltimore's talent went out here. Not much else to really say here. Cleveland, take your loss and go, and Baltimore, get back on track and keep it moving. Not much else to say. Mac Jones, with some stable organization. Good. He looked good. He really did. Jawan Jennings and Christian McCaffrey both look good. Nice work was done here. So without Brock Purdy and George Kittle, the Niners were able to go to New Orleans, and all they had to do was play a clean, crisp game. They did such a thing. Good work by San Francisco to take care of business against New Orleans, although to New Orleans' credit, this is the second straight week where they actually played admirable, and they kept it respectable. All New Orleans had to do down 5 was go down the field and kind of score a touchdown against a decent Niner defense. Unfortunately for them, they just couldn't do it. It was 8 plays and out, and they could get no closer. And it was a fumble by Spencer Rattler, which Bryce Huff, who actually looks like he's a decent pass rusher again, was able to get the job done, and the Niners are able to go to 2-0. It's an ugly kind of sort of 2-0, but you could be in worse spots. The Niners are 2-0, and I think they'll take it. We move to the Cowboys game with the Giants, and before we start, James Hudson, yikes. If he's on the roster by this afternoon, by mid-afternoon, I'd be absolutely stunned. 4 penalties on the first drive. It had us all baffled, like, why are you still here? And then why did he act like he did nothing wrong? Which is kind of wild, considering he basically tried to punch a Cowboy and then wrestle another one, which is, again, kind of wild. But this game isn't really about him. The first series is, but this game isn't truly about James Hudson. This game is more so about how both these offenses actually played really well. Russell Wilson threw for 400 plus, which we didn't think he had those kinds of games in him anymore, I don't think. But he did it. He threw for 450. He threw for 3 tugs. Their run game was a little suspect, though Cam Scatterbill looks like he's a promising back. And we got 2 really good days from Wan'Dale Robinson, and especially Malik Neighbors. Both those guys absolutely balled out, and the Cowboys' defense looked really, really bad. Dallas' offense at least kind of sort of countered it, sure. You got a good day from Dak. You got a very good day from Javonte Williams, who looks like Dallas' best running back, to be honest. You got a good day by CeeDee Lamb. You got a touchdown from Turpin. You got a touchdown from Pickens. You got some productive things to happen here. But we get to the end, and as we do, we get to a gorgeous moonball by Russell Wilson to Malik Neighbors, and it felt like at this point that the end was near, that Dallas was going to actually lose to the Giants, which is something that Dak Prescott just does not do. And instead, they just had to get the ball to midfield. And once they did, they got Brandon Aubrey a chance to kick it. All Aubrey needed was a chance, and he bangs in a 64-yard kick with relative ease, and they go to overtime. Now, no, I don't like the overtime rules. I don't think that it should just be 100% catered to the offense. Defense matters, all that good stuff. But to be fair, both teams got the ball ample amount of times. Dallas got it 3 times, the Giants twice. On the second Giants situation, Russell Wilson threw a pick, which was not great. And it kind of jump-started the Cowboys' sense of urgency as they were able to get the ball downfield quick enough to get Brandon Aubrey a second shot at a field goal, which he buried. Dallas survives and advances and moves forward as they needed to in the worst possible way. And for the Giants, no shame in this loss. You actually look respectable. Unfortunately, Brandon Aubrey's leg was just good enough to beat you. There's good news and bad news for the Bengals. The good news being you're 2-0. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both had good games. They both scored touchdowns. This is good stuff. Your offense looked capable and potent. You scored 31 points, which is very good. Except the fact that Joe Burrow wasn't around for the very end of the game. Burrow injuring his turf toe and now being out for 3 months is absolutely devastating. And for a Bengals team that they need their best players, and Chase and Burrow to be their best players to go anywhere due to the lack of defense, that is just brutal. And for Jacksonville, this is a game that I'm actually really surprised they didn't win after Burrow got hurt, to be honest. I'm a little disappointed that they didn't close the deal. Now, Jake Browning's not a bad quarterback, It's just the fact that, okay, in theory with Trevor Lawrence, you're supposed to close that deal. At least you're billed to close that deal. They did not close that deal. And part of that's because it's their defense that didn't close it. It was all Jacksonville had to do, to be honest, might have been, okay, can we kick a field goal and can we close this out? And no, they did not. They were at the Cincinnati 7. They went for the dagger. They went for the win. And instead, they could have just taken the 3 and made them go down the field. Instead, it didn't even matter that they didn't get it because you got the Travis Hunter penalty, and then you got a 93-yard drive in 3.5 minutes to close this deal and to make this happen. And it's a brutal, brutal way for Jacksonville to lose, even with not getting the 4th and goal at the 7. And all you had to do was defend him for 93 yards, Jake Browning. And that's just a bad, bad way to take an L. So Cincinnati escapes once again, and they earned this one as opposed to last week where it was a gift. But Joe Burrow being out for 3 months is not a good trade-off. Let's talk about Seattle and Pittsburgh. And I guess we're going to close out the AFC North portion of this video with this. Caleb Johnson, question, why? Why did you do that? Why did you let this ball go after it looked like you touched it? And even if you didn't, everybody knows that effectively it's an onside kick rules if he goes past 10 yards. And if Seattle recovers it, they get the ball where it is. And unfortunately for them, they recovered it in the end zone, which means tutty. And a game-changing mistake by Pittsburgh leads to Seattle handling business and really taking control of the game from here on. The Steelers' offense really wasn't that effective at all in the first half, and in the second half, I should say. And ultimately, Seattle just kind of grinded out the W. There wasn't really much to it, to be honest. Like all Pittsburgh did was score 3 points in the second half, and Seattle just kind of suffocated Pittsburgh from here on. They got the end, and it's just not much there in the second half of this game for Pittsburgh. Seattle just took care of business, and that's kind of all they needed to do. They kind of needed to get back on track after last week's win. Now, sure, we did get the touchdown by DK Metcalf. We did get an NO by Jalen Ramsey. His first NO as a part of the Steelers, and first touchdown as a part of the Steelers for DK. Sure, both parties got kind of sort of revenge. Or reasoning why Pittsburgh traded for these guys. But it's still kind of ugly that all it took was one gigantic mistake, and that was the end of the proceedings. When it comes to the Titans and the Rams game, it's kind of simple to me. Cam Ward, I kind of like. There's talent there, sure. That roster is just really, really bad. And unfortunately for him, that kind of came into play because the Rams roster is overall far better, and the Rams were able to get home and cause some chaos towards Cam Ward, which is another part of the bad roster thing. The offensive line that Tennessee has just doesn't seem capable enough to protect Cam Ward. This game was relatively close, to be honest, though. And I think Tennessee does deserve some credit for keeping this game within some sort of shouting distance before Matt Stafford and Devontae Adams put it away and kind of said, okay, that's enough of this. We're going to end these proceedings. Good day for Devontae Adams. Puka Nacua had that rushing touchdown, and he also handled business as a receiver because, of course, he did. But this was a very good performance by the Rams, who just played efficient football and didn't make a number of mistakes. They made a couple. Like Stafford had an NO, and there was a couple fumbles here and there. But still, a very good performance by the Rams. Good stuff there. And for some reason, Kyren Williams didn't score a touchdown. That doesn't normally happen. That's kind of a rare occurrence, like Haley's Comet or something. Anyway, the Rams are 2-0 in the AFC South. We keep it moving. Okay, I'm starting to think that there's something wrong here in Chicago. Is Ben Johnson not the guy that he was built to be, or is Caleb Williams not the guy that he was built to be? One of these answers might be true. And in the case of the defense, this was an ugly performance by the Bears defense, getting shredded in the last 5 quarters to the tune of 70-plus points. It was just awful the way that their defense looked. Detroit had a point to prove, and they had a point to prove that they're not dead. They proved that in spades. Sonic and Knuckles both scored touchdowns. You got the long one to Jameson Williams. Amon-Ra St. Brown scored. This was an exhibition of destruction by a Lions team that needed to get back on the horse after what the Packers did to them. This was a very impressive performance by a Lions team that needed to have a very impressive performance. Good work by Detroit. I am alarmed by the Bears, though. This has been a very rough 2 games in the NFC North. And Caleb Williams, aside from getting the ball to Rome Odunze, has not looked very good at all for a lot of this season. No, I am not going to make a joke about this being the shortest quarterback matchup potentially in NFL history, because you've got Kyler Murray on one side and Bryce Young on the other. There's no, you must be this tall to play quarterback signs here. We're not doing that. We're not discriminating against height. But what we are doing is talking about how the Panthers are not looking like the Panthers that ended last season, and how they got absolutely cooked for a lot of this game. And we are going to talk about how Arizona could have finished them off and made this even worse, but somehow kind of sort of played with their food. That's something that a bird shouldn't do when there's a cat in play. Yet this game, there was a real shot for Carolina to win it at the very end, after they made a pretty good run in the second half while none of us were watching it. A lot of us were watching the Eagles-Chiefs game. More on that in a sec. And instead, it would look like, okay, Carolina could win the game. Carolina can save the day. We got Calais Campbell, who does not age and keeps Arizona relatively stable on defense to finish the job and get the game-ending sack and close the door. Are there concerns about Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. chemistry? Maybe. Are there concerns that Arizona probably should have won by more? Sure, there probably should be. A couple of them. Are there concerns that the run game just didn't go anywhere for Arizona? Yeah, I'd say so. It's a little rough that James Conner and Kyler Murray had a combined 71 yards rushing. That's not great when both guys can run well. But still, Arizona will take the win, and they'll take it and keep it moving. I do want to see a little bit more out of Marvin Harrison, though. Maybe he got clamped up by J.C. Horn. That happens. Okay, J.C. Horn's really good, but it's just not great that Marvin Harrison only had 27 yards on 2 catches. Not great. Something that is great, though, the somehow revival and resurgence and emergence of Daniel Jones. This is not a question I didn't think I'd have to ask this season. Instead, Daniel Jones and the Colts have not officially punted yet. That's absolutely stunning, and probably the most stunning stat in these first 2 games. He just hasn't punted yet. Wild to think, but true. And as for Denver's defense, after looking really good and opportunistic against Tennessee last week, they were not so against the Colts. Indianapolis is not making mistakes. Instead, they're just making good plays. And so is Daniel Jones. Tyler Warren looks like an absolute monster. But then again, I warned you guys he would. And obviously, when it comes to this game, it comes down to a few possessions towards the end, and none of them favor the Broncos. You got the NO by Bo Nix, which was not very good. You got the doink kick by Will Lutz, which was also not very good. And then you got what was a shanked kick getting overturned because of a penalty due to leverage. Not great at all. Indianapolis steals the game with the last-second walk-off field goal. The Colts are 2-0, and they look like a pretty solid team. While Denver, you're 1-1, you probably should be 2-0, and I think you're still a very good squad. This loss just looks like it's going to sting, especially considering how well the Chargers are playing. More on them in a sec. But we are going to stay in the AFC West and talk about the Super Bowl rematch that was Eagles-Chiefs, and a game that was nowhere near as non-competitive as Super Bowl was. Actually, this game was pretty competitive. This game was good, and it was very defensive. Pat Mahomes made plays with his legs more so because the receiving core is not looking great so far. Tyquan Thornton did catch a touchdown pass after absolutely torching Quinyon Mitchell, but that happened later in the game. Things that were consistent throughout the game were along the lines of Saquon Barkley having a pretty solid rushing day on the ground, Jalen Hurts not throwing for many yards, so he did get the ball to A.J. Brown a little bit more, and Devontae Smith on a couple of deep passes. Tom Brady trying to dime out the NFL for the Eagles false starting on the brotherly shove, which they were. We shouldn't lie about that. They absolutely were false starting, and they get away with it. Mr. False Start Jawan Taylor, because of course he is. He is the president of the False Start Club. Lane Johnson's vice president, but people don't talk about that. But the thing we are going to talk about is the pivotal moment in this game where Kansas City had a golden opportunity to get closer, and then the off of Travis Kelce's hands, he bobbles it, and it's picked off, and then the Eagles go right down the field the opposite way and score. A true 14-point swing, because Kansas City probably scores. If Kelce catches that, they probably go on and eventually score. A devastating turn of events to start the fourth quarter, where it could have been 17-10 Kansas City. It could have been 17 to 10, and instead it's 20 to 10 Eagles, and Kansas City basically chasing the game from then on. Yes, the Thornton touchdown happens, but the Eagles basically burned the clock out from the rest of the way after the onside kick, and we just never got there where Kansas City could really threaten them again. It's unfortunate for the Chiefs that they're 0-2, and they face two really good opponents, but you're 0-2 because you just couldn't beat either of those two really good opponents. The offensive line for Kansas City did get overwhelmed by the Eagles, but the Eagles are going to do that to a lot of teams. Let's get to the Sunday night game, and speaking of offensive lines getting overwhelmed, both of these O-lines got overwhelmed. First off, the Falcons. Yes, your O-line was no match for the Vikings' attack when necessary. Yes, we knew that from Minnesota. They can get home. They had two really good pass rushers. We understood this. But Atlanta, you've got a pass rush. J.J. McCarthy was under siege the entire night, and that's very impressive to me. I was wondering if the rookies could do their thing and get home against pro quarterbacks, and it turns out, yes, they could. And James Pierce and company, they were getting to the QB at a very effective rate. The Vikings just never got into gear the entire night, with exception to a couple of plays where A.J. Terrell missed and Justin Jefferson got open. Aside from that, it just never felt like the Vikings were ever in any sort of rhythm whatsoever. Atlanta did not allow a tutty. Very impressive. And their defense came to ball and came to play. Atlanta didn't need to do offense too much. They just didn't crash the car, which in some cases, that's all you need. Tyler Algier with a touchdown to handle the rest, and a really good, loud, powerful statement bounce-back win for a Falcons team that needed it after the way they lost to Tampa Bay. Speaking of quarterbacks also under siege, Baker Mayfield and Bryce Young were under siege all night. I get it on the Houston side of things. Two excellent pass rushers, Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter. I get that. And I also get that Tampa Bay, have had plenty of injuries up front on their offensive line. Then there's Houston. And then there's C.J. Stroud being under siege yet again. And this is sometime without Kalijah Kancey, who got hurt at some point during the game. And just the beating that Stroud is taking is just wow. Baker took one too, like I mentioned, but yeah, Stroud is going to take a beating horribly, it seems like, for a lot of the season, because this offensive line is just not able to block pass rushers. Houston's lack of discipline is another concern to me. Way too many illegal contacts, way too many pass interference penalties, way too many holdings from especially the Texans secondary that I do love. I do think this is the best secondary in football. The problem is they're just way, way, way too undisciplined and too grabby and too handsy. Stingley Jr. and Lassiter especially. Just not great there. Even with all of this, Houston, all they had to do was hold the lead for one more drive and really make one stop to get this W and beat Tampa Bay. Baker Mayfield gets out of the pocket, and for one time he wasn't sacked. He was able to get free and, lead to this first down where he's diving and is flying all over the place. Ultimately, it was Tampa Bay who was able to get the job done at the very, very end of the game, thanks to Rachaad White saving the day with a 2-yard tutty, which negated what would have been the go-ahead score by Nick Chubb, who had that run, but not much else, as Tampa Bay was able to clamp down on the run defense and really stuff the box quite well, because Houston's offensive line, again, yikes. Houston's now 0-2, and they're in a situation where Indy is 2-0, and I don't think anybody saw either of these things coming, at least not the way they did. As for Tampa, very impressive stuff. You're 2-0 with 2 road wins and 2 comeback road wins, where Baker's taken horrible beatings, but you got 2 road wins. That's good. That's hard to do in the NFL, is to win on the road. Tampa Bay's done it twice. At the very end of games, good work. And now let's get to the Chargers and Raiders, and the Chargers aren't chargering. This is quite the interesting timeline where we expect LA to make mistakes. We expect LA to crumble or fold in a big game, in a big spot, in a big situation. And yet these are 2 primetime standalone games where the Chargers didn't do that. Where Justin Herbert played pretty well. Where the defense were kind of sort of bend but don't break and very sturdy. And then they would cause some big turnovers when necessary. They made Geno Smith look kind of bad. And Gene Team was only okay. And that's okay for me. That's a good sign and a good look for a Charger team that sometimes would bend and fold and crumble in these situations. They didn't here. Quentin Johnston has actual hands, and they're very capable of catching passes. Very impressive. That was a really nice deep ball that Justin Herbert threw. We can all admit that. That was a very nice deep ball. Still, as we kind of kept going in this game, it never really felt like the Raiders were going to come back and win just because the Chargers just weren't going to make enough mistakes for them to do such a thing. And the Chargers weren't going to allow too many big plays from the Raiders to do such a thing. Geno did miss a couple throws, yes, to Bowers and obviously the interception, but it simply wasn't that bad of a game for the Chargers. They just played really well, and I think we're in a timeline where the Chargers are becoming bona fide contenders before our very eyes. They will be tested on Sunday. I'll talk about that tomorrow, but I like what I'm seeing from this Chargers team so far. One thing I like personally so far, my picks. I went 12-4 this past week, and my overall record is 22-10. Coming up tomorrow, power rankings. Where does your team rank after we get some more clarity from week 2? Who's going to be at which station and in which tier? Appropriate question after what happened with the Eagles and Bills this week, who's number 3? And will there be new surprises on the zombie tier in Kentucky? That will be the first stop of my next train of thought.